Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Labour has described the Transport Secretary, Chris Grayling, as an international embarrassment who should be sacked without delay. They wanted him to appear before the Commons tonight to explain the Brexit ferry blunder that saw Eurotunnel paid £33 million. But the Health Secretary was put up instead. Our political correspondent Romilly Weeks is in Westminster. Romilly, why are the opposition so upset?
Well, they, like many, were expecting the Transport Secretary to answer questions today. This is a minister, after all, whose reputation for being blunder-prone has even made it to America, with the New York Times asking today, how does he survive the curious case of failing Grayling? But no, Labour was asking questions about the out-of-court, the multi-million-pound out-of-court settlement awarded to Eurotunnel for botched no-deal ferry contracts, and it was left to the Health Secretary to defend his colleague, Mr Grayling, against this attack from Labour.
Even in this golden age of ministerial incompetence, the Transport Secretary stands out from the crowd. He leaves a trail of destruction in his wake, causing chaos and wasting billions of pounds, yet he shows no contrition, no acknowledgement of his mistakes, nor any resolve to learn and improve.
Number 10 says that the Health Secretary was responding to the questions because the Eurotunnel decision was a cross-governmental one, but it adds to the impression of the Transport Secretary becoming a liability. Will the Prime Minister get rid of him? Well, he is that increasingly rare beast of being a supporter of Brexit and a supporter of the Prime Minister, so she probably can't afford to quite yet.
Okay, Romilly, thanks very much.
Well, it's been another tough few days for Chris Grayling. You know it must be bad when the New York Times describes you as, quote, a byword for haplessness in a golden age of political blundering in Britain. But the man of the moment was nowhere to be seen today. It fell to his cabinet colleagues to stand at the dispatch box and take the slings and arrows for their friend this afternoon. Here's Fatima Manji.
Planes, trains and automobiles.
Planes, trains and ferries that never existed. Is Britain's transport policy becoming as farcical as a film plot? And just where is the man responsible? The Secretary of State for Transport, filmed here on an earlier occasion, was nowhere to be found today. The last possible sighting at the weekend was this. These may or may not be Mr Grayling's fingers. Chris Grayling has yet to answer questions after the government was forced to pay out £33 million to Eurotunnel. The company had taken legal action against the Department of Transport for handing out no-deal Brexit contracts to ferry companies, including to one that actually had no ships. But in the Commons today, Mr Grayling failed to appear. Instead, the Health Secretary was sent to answer questions about the Eurotunnel payment.
I would like to update the House.
Where is the £2.7 billion man? I've asked him to step aside several times. I've challenged the Prime Minister to sack him, and now Mr Speaker has got his own social media hashtag failing Grayling. Surely now is the time that he has to go. The secrecy is a real concern surrounding this. How much documentation is still hidden away from public view?
And the Transport Secretary's woes look set to continue. Next week, he faces legal action from 5 councils over the decision to expand Heathrow Airport. Mr Grayling has claimed fewer people will be affected by aircraft noise. The councils, including those led by Conservatives, are furious at that claim.
One always relies on Secretaries of State to be both diligent, honest, effective and efficient. Well, Mr Grayling has to make up his own mind whether he passes those tests.
You seem to be suggesting that he doesn't.
He must make up his own mind whether he passes those tests. Many others would say he hasn't.
And the screws are also tightening on him over HS2. Yes, even more legal action. The company Bechtel is reportedly seeking damages for what they claim was an unfair bid process to redevelop a station. The Department for Transport wouldn't comment on the issue. Meanwhile, Mr Grayling's performance has hit international headlines. Perhaps it's best emphasised by this extraordinary correction from the New York Times.
An earlier version of this article misstated the amount that a Labour Party report claimed Chris Grayling's misadventures had cost British taxpayers. It is £2.7 billion, not 2.7 million.
So who is Chris Grayling? Born on April Fool's Day in 1962, the Transport Secretary began his career in TV, starting out in BBC News, then going on to run a number of TV production companies in the 90s. He began his political career as a councillor and was elected as an MP in 2001. As Shadow Home Secretary, he was criticised for misrepresenting statistics on violent crime. And as Justice Secretary, he controversially banned sending books to prisoners, something later ruled unlawful by a High Court judge. Perhaps most crucially, though, he's a long-term friend and ally of Theresa May, and she needs as many of those as she can get.
Well, joining us now from Westminster is the Shadow Transport Secretary, Andy MacDonald. Andy MacDonald, as you heard in that report, it's estimated by the New York Times that he's cost the British taxpayer £2.7 billion. What will it take to get Mr. Grayling to consider his position?
Well, I'm wondering that very question, John. We seem to stumble from catastrophe to disaster with Mr. Grayling, and every time it costs the taxpayer incredible amounts of money. And today he couldn't even be bothered to turn up to explain why so much money had been paid out to Eurotunnel and why he got himself in that situation in the first place. He was told that this whole procurement process for ferries of contracting with companies that didn't have any ships was flawed, and yet he refused to accept that, and litigation then ensued. I'm now concerned that there'll be even more litigation from this settlement with Eurotunnel itself.
Well, now let me just ask you this, because it is surely a measure of how divided politics is at the moment, not least in the Labour Party itself, that nobody has been able to produce some method of getting rid of him today.
Well, I will stick at it, John. I've asked for him to be sacked and for him to resign on a number of occasions, and I'll continue to do so long as he remains in post. We cannot afford Chris Grayling. The litany of errors just goes on, and this man is just pouring money down the drain on a daily basis.
You can blame the man. Can you not perhaps focus some attention on the person who's employed him?
Well, absolutely, and I've said that very thing today, because there is nobody in the country who has confidence in the Transport Secretary other than the Prime Minister, and that speaks volumes about her judgment and her perilous and weak political state. She needs Chris Grayling there as her one and only friend in the cabinet, and it just shows what a weak position she's in. But it's her judgment that's now in question.
The weak position. That in part is due to Brexit. It seems you're unable to exploit that, and indeed you're so divided yourselves on things like Heathrow, for example, where you are all at 6s and 7s. You have no method of getting rid of him.
Well, the Prime Minister is the one person who can do the right thing. I mean, you've seen it over the last several months and years, that ordinary behaviours that would bring about somebody's resignation or dismissal in ordinary times seems to have completely gone out the window. We seem to have lost touch with what is right. And what has to happen, what is right in these circumstances, is for this Transport Secretary to go.
Well,
and that's down to the Prime Minister.
In a word, Parliament therefore does not have the power to get rid of him.
Parliament does not. It's up to the Prime Minister. But if she's prepared to continue to take these embarrassments and these international humiliations, then I'm afraid it doesn't do much for us as a nation that our Prime Minister is so ill-informed and makes such poor judgments.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us.